My mother read to me in both languages, French first because that was the house, and then English because that was the city outside. By the time I was 8, I had read things I didn't fully understand, which is, as it turns out, precisely the point. The discomfort of partial comprehension is where the work happens. We removed that discomfort from education and called it progress. Between 2021 and 2031, book banning and curriculum removal in the United States reached a scale not seen since the 1950s. PEN America tracked over 5,000 individual book titles challenged or removed during that decade. The books were overwhelmingly about race, identity, history, and sexuality. The argument was always protection. Protection of children from discomfort. I want to be precise about what was actually lost, because the debate in 2026 was too much about which books and not enough about what books do. Books teach tolerance for ambiguity. They teach that a character can be wrong and still worth following. They teach that historical figures who did good things also did terrible things, and that this complexity does not cancel either truth. That cognitive capacity, the ability to hold contradiction without resolving it, is foundational, and it atrophied. The effects weren't visible in test scores. Tests don't measure ambiguity tolerance. They measure retrieval of correct answers from a set of options. What showed up by 2035 was in civic behavior. Populations with significantly reduced literary exposure in secondary education showed measurably higher rates of binary thinking in political contexts, not because they were less intelligent, but because the muscle had never been trained. This was studied. The data existed by 2030. It wasn't acted on because the people who had removed the books were not interested in the downstream cognitive effects of having removed the books. They were interested in cultural control, and they had achieved it, and the evidence that it had costs was not the kind of evidence they were in the habit of examining. The parallel erosion was in reading volume itself. By 2026, the average American under 25 read fewer than 4 books per year. The global smartphone penetration and short-form video consumption had restructured attention spans in ways that educators documented but couldn't reverse. You cannot teach someone to read Dostoevsky if their attention has been optimized for 12-second videos. The infrastructure of the reading mind had to be built young or rebuilt later at enormous cost. My daughter read compulsively, despite everything. She was born in 2022 and grew up during the restriction years and the curriculum wars. She read banned books because I had them on shelves and because banning things makes them interesting to children, which is one of the few self-defeating aspects of censorship that actually works in our favor. What I would tell the educators of 2026, the ones still fighting to keep books in classrooms, is that they were fighting for something more important than the specific texts. They were fighting for the cognitive architecture those texts build. The specific books are almost secondary. The practice of sustained engagement with difficult narrative is what matters. Protect the practice. In 2103, literary education is mandatory to age 16 across most governance zones. Not because we are enlightened, we are not particularly, but because the civic cost of the generation that wasn't taught to read complex narrative was so visible and so expensive that even the most recalcitrant administrations accepted the corrective. It took about 30 years of evidence to make the case. 30 years is a long time to wait for obvious things. My mother's copy of Gabrielle Roy's Bonheur d'Occasion is in my daughter's house now. It is falling apart. My daughter has repaired it 3 times with archival tape. My granddaughter is not old enough for it yet. She will be in a few years. We will read it together in French, starting at a level slightly above what she can follow. That is the method. That is all the method ever was.